I would spend the night.
I'm spending it. Yeah, so I'm gonna. Well, since they're like my home is kind of like on the way since I live in San Ramon.
That's what I was
So
saying.
I'm
I
gonna
was
go
telling
home,
people you lived in Pleasant or
go to get.
Dublin. You're
I'm
actually
gonna
slightly further away.
have dinner, see the kids, and then take off probably like around 7:30 or so.
Did Monster give you a binder or a packet of these that it's sort of in the order? I think Gina will have that for you.
Okay, he didn't, but we've talked. Are these the ones sort of that she's gonna have?
Yeah, she's going to sort of roll through them. You know.
He's told me what those are, so I'll just follow her lead.
See, that's the beauty of it. She can't really clearly, but the documents really. Monster said he feels.
After, I almost said good morning.
It'll go great.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to begin our committee meeting, and what I'd like to do is we're going to begin by just having introductions, and if I could start, actually, do you mind starting, John?
Not at all. John Mills, on behalf of the county executive.
Dave Cortese, Board of Supervisors.
Cindy Chavez, Board of Supervisors.
Good afternoon. Rob Coelho from County Counsel's Office.
Bob Minicucci, Social Services Agency.
Regina Martin, DCSS.
Great. So what we'll begin with is public comment, and I'm going to call everybody up who put in a card. If you didn't mean to speak on this item, I'm going to assume you did because there's no agenda number. And we'll begin with Scott Largent. So Scott, if you can come on down. And Scott will be followed by Candace, Thomas, Ashlyn, and Scout. And those are all the cards I have for public comment.
Ready when you are, Frank. Thank you. Frank's new. Welcome to the team, Frank. All right. What I have here is a visitation provider list right here, and I've talked about a lot about supervised visitation that I have to deal with to see my daughter, Kalia. This list, Cindy, was provided by Paul Murphy. This was years back at a meeting, and he was watching from upstairs. I believe this is when he was working for you as your policy aide, I believe. And Paul came right down, and he had made a copy of the list, and he jumped right on it, and he brought this thing down, which was very helpful. And Paul recognized a previous colleague on here, Richard Garcia, which is a licensed family therapist that does the supervised visitation on the Alameda. This was a real, I very much appreciated this when this happened, because this was basically, I mean, he's your staff, it's coming out of your office to be able to have him help me. The problem with this one right here is when people don't want to cooperate with any of these providers, they're not required to have to do it. So that would have been, that probably would have been the best thing that could ever happen to me. I went and met with the gentleman, very familiar with Paul. I think you've met Richard Garcia before. He's a great man. And what was fantastic is he knew my story. He watches all these meetings. I could have gotten family therapy, learned how to co-parent my child together, had the visitation and everything, and it would have been great. And even though it was a little more expensive, I think I would have probably been in there for maybe 3 or 4 months and been way past this. By now, I would have been co-parenting with half custody and everything. If there's any way, if you could ever at all, not for me, but learn from Richard about the process and what people are going through. He's very knowledgeable about the whole visitation process, and he can kind of maybe just give you some pointers on what people are dealing with.
Great.
So,
Thank
you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. My name is Candace Thomas, and I'm the Director of Transition Age Youth Services for Unity Care. I'm here on behalf of the amazing young people I work with and the staff. I've been with Unity Care for 10 years. About a month ago, Santa Clara County executives made the decision to no longer partner with Unity Care in any capacity to include transitional housing, mental health services, and other critical community-based programs. This decision is extreme and came as a shock to our amazing staff who have committed their careers to serving youth and families. More importantly, this decision has been very difficult and traumatic for the youth and families we serve, many of which have experienced first with Unity Care, first time engaging with a clinician or care provider, first time reaching a treatment goal, first time managing a behavior, first time feeling safe and at home. We acknowledge that we're not perfect and have not been successful in some of our programs over the years. However, our agency has always provided culturally competent and quality housing and supportive services to transition-age youth. We have the unique ability to successfully engage some of the most challenging youth while creating an environment that feels like family. Not only is this recent decision by the county disruptive to the stability of the youth we serve, but it was imposed in an insensitive manner and with unrealistic timelines. Many of our youth are confused and very disappointed in the decision makers of this county. One thing we always tell our young people is to never allow anyone to silence your voice. Always advocate for yourself and the things that are important to you, no matter how uncomfortable. So here we are today, recognizing that this may not change any decisions that have been made, but standing firmly in what we believe, and hoping that you never make a decision of this magnitude without first considering the voices of those impacted most. So to our young people that decided to come today, I'm very proud of you, and it's been an honor to serve you, and continue to be bold and stay focused on your goals. So I'm here in support of them because they wanted their voices to be heard. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. If you filled out a card, there was a couple others, Ashlyn and Scout. If you want to speak, please come forward now. And thank you. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Ashlyn, and I'm placed with Unity Care. I'm here because nobody's answering my questions. I don't know why you guys made this decision, but I've been in the system since I was 14. The places I've been, I haven't been comfortable because there's always drama, there's always something going on. I never feel safe. But then now that I got the opportunity to stay with Unity Care, that first day I stepped there, it was different. Like, I could feel the vibe that it was just, the girls were chill. We have a great communication. I feel safe. I feel good. I love being here. They're like, I could say that they're like my family, because my family's far away from me. But one question that I had is everybody that works with us, like you guys, when you guys are done working, you guys go home. But when I'm done with school or with work or anything, I go to a place that I call now my home. And now I feel that it's not fair because you guys are taking that from me. And then now I'm gonna go somewhere else or stay with somebody that I don't even know. And I have to tell my story over again. And I feel that that's not fair to me. And I just want answers.
Thank you, Ashlyn.
Supervisor Chavez, just want to indicate that you can't get answers because of the way this item is posted on the agenda. And I think Supervisor Chavez said it at the outset. It's for general public comment, so we can't speak to very specific issues like we will later on the agenda. But those answers to the questions you're asking are available, and there are people here from both of our staffs that can help introduce you to folks that can sit down and not only help with the answers, but hear your side of the story.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Fair?
Yeah.
Thank you. And I know Enrique is here presently and Amy sitting right up in front.
Okay, yeah, because when I talk to people, they just say, oh, nobody's going to give you answers because that's something that we're not allowed to tell you. And that's all they said.
You'll get some answers, but I have to let my colleague chair the meeting and your time is up, but these folks can
Okay.
talk to you for a longer period of time now, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
No problem. He's responding because we have limits, but we both want to come down and talk to you ourselves. So, but we have a meeting. But stay right there and Scout, and then I'm going to have a couple next steps. All right, Scout, welcome.
Hi, my name is Scout. That's my nickname. My full name is Sharon Baumhickel. And I just want to say that foster care, it's about bringing people together, if anything. And this separation, it's been quick. It's been really hard on the girls where I live with. And I live with her and 6 other girls. And our wonderful house manager, Kenya, and her dog, Oreo, whom I love. And I wish they all could have been here. I wish you could see the emotions that they feel, because when I was sitting there in the meeting with her and all of our other sisters and everyone from the other houses, everyone from out of county who's getting kicked out, there were tears. There were things that people who are higher up, people who are making these decisions, they aren't seeing. And I feel like that kind of impact should be taken into consideration when making these types of decisions. So I'm not getting kicked out personally, but I also have my therapist, Jolyn, Samara, Kenya, so many other wonderful staff members whom these girls have formed connections with over months, over years, people who have become like family, people who these community members they don't have, and that they're going to have to recreate, and that's just such a painful process for everyone. And if there's anything you guys can do to ease that process or ease that process for the next time something like this happens, that would be amazing. That would mean the world to us. Thank you.
Thank you both very much for coming. And I do want to ask, I know Amy's got to help us with the next part of the meeting, but if I could ask both of you to have a conversation with Enrique. He's waving his hand at you. Thank you both for coming forward. Dan, is Dan here? I'm so sorry, and my glasses are all messed up, so. Okay, so Dan, could you come forward for just a minute? So when something's not agendized, that's right, I just wanted to say this to you. I just wanted to reaffirm something that Supervisor Cortese was saying. When something's not agendized, it's very limited what we can talk about, because we don't talk about things where the community can't be present, because then they're mad that they missed out. So we're not going to dive really deep today. 2 things, we will follow up with a meeting, and I'm happy to get some time to sit with you all where you live. That's really up to you, but Amy, and if you coordinate that through Enrique, I'm happy to do that. I also just wanted to say to all of the people who work for Unity Care that are here, I know the quality of the work of so many of you because I've been interacting with Unity Care for years. So can we do things better? You bet. And I deeply appreciate you coming and telling us what we're not doing right. That's how we get better at doing things for our community. So thank you for holding us accountable for that. I wondered if you could just give a quick update about if there's anything here you heard that you think you can respond to that might be of help, or if your thought is this should really be off agenda.
I think I can give a kind of a general update that any of these transitions, we have multiple staff members involved in making sure that communication is going out and that any kind of transition that has to occur is thoughtful. So I'm part of a team that I can bring this back and make sure that if there's been any kind of lapse in communication, that we're ensuring that ceases. Yep.
The other thing is, I do want to make sure that we codify in writing what we understand about the hiring process. That I know there's been a little bit of confusion about what the transition is relative to staffing, but I would just like to make sure that we verify and codify that in writing with Seneca. And part of the reason for that, I'm interested in doing that, is just making sure I have something I can send out when people reach out to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us. Back to the rest of the agenda, we're going to move to the consent and changes to the calendar. And I think the only issue that we have on consent, or as recommended on consent, would be item 5, and that's our intergovernmental relations report, if that's okay with you. So we'll take that action. That's item 5. Is there anybody here that's here to speak on item 5 that just feels like, I got something to say, I got to say it? Or you're good with no report? Okay. So item 5, we'll just take an action to put that on consent, and that's unanimous. We'll now move to item 4, and this is animal therapy. No.
There we go. Good afternoon. My name is Nick Burchard, Deputy Chief Probation Officer, currently over our juvenile institutions, which is our James Ranch and our juvenile hall here in Santa Clara County. On May 22nd, 2018, Supervisor Chavez requested a report relating to how the county could proceed to allow animals in the juvenile probation facilities for animal therapy. The report that was provided provides the Children, Seniors, and Families Committee with information in response to that request, and I'm here to answer any questions that you may have over that report.
So I have one question. I know that there's a little bit, it's up in the air as to whether or not the pet therapy has value. Is that a too strong a way to say it?
No, because I believe it does have value.
And is the reality that there just aren't that many studies that aren't done by dog and cat companies? Because I know they do. I get them all the time because I have pets, so I get those little blurbs, oh, they're healthy for you, or whatever, you know. Is that the reason? Is there really just not a body of research?
So I think that most of the research out there is really done on veterans returning when it comes to a therapeutic kind of their cognitive kind of therapeutic programs that they do. There has been data related to prisons and the programs that they do with their dogs there. Currently in juvenile hall, we run a program that's Unchained. We did data collection on that as well, and it was positive, as you spoke about, in the benefits from that program there.
So I understand that your thoughts would be that we should look at the ranch versus the hall. I think when I was looking at juvenile hall, I was interested in it, I think in part too, because the open space in this inner city area, I thought just would lend itself to having something that kids could do outside, and animals I thought would be helpful. But I understand that it may make more sense to do a pilot with the ranch, and the amount of money would be about $50,000. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's what we found. We had polled 43 different juvenile halls across the state, and there are 13 of them that have similar programs to what we run in juvenile hall, with the same benefits that they're certainly the kids have access to. And then by developing a program similar to that, a therapeutic program, if you will, for the kids at the ranch, they stay there longer. I think the therapeutic component would be more meaningful out there at the ranch with the kids' length of stay, certainly out there from 6 to 8 months, and being able to develop that type of program out there would be very beneficial.
Well, the other thing that I think would be very opportunistic for us is having, because we have young people that are in treatment already, it would be interesting for us to learn better how the integration of pet therapy does or doesn't help certain folks. Well, is that what your thinking is as well?
Correct.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is ask that, see, Dave, do you have any questions or comments about this?
I'm not entirely clear on the adoptability program versus therapy program. I mean, the packet talks about juvenile hall having adoptability training programs or the examples of juvenile halls having that. I guess I'm trying to distinguish between what we're doing now in terms of adoptability and or therapy, and then what this would augment when I say this, any action that we take today. I'm just not clear. I normally maybe it would be clear as day to 9 out of 10 people who read this transmittal, but it's not. It's fuzzy for me. I don't understand.
So currently in the juvenile hall, and it's kind of twofold, where we have that adoptability program that we run with the kids in juvenile hall that also has a therapeutic kind of component to it. When we interview the kids, when the kids are talked to, they receive the benefits of that program, which is 12 weeks in length. They teach, they guide the dogs, they have trainers there to help them with dogs that are unsociable and they're not adoptable. And so by bringing this program in, we're able to take these dogs with the kids, with an outside provider who helps teach them the social skills that they need so that they can be adopted. When they graduate from this program of 12 weeks, the kids receive a certificate, and then the dogs are put up for adoption. And I think that we've had all but a couple dogs who have been adopted through that program. So they're also receiving the therapeutic value of being able to work with the dog, learning sympathy, empathy, being able to teach and train dogs with somebody who's helping them. It becomes very beneficial for the youth as well. So we run that through that 12-week program there at Juvenile Hall for the kids who have kind of a longer average length of stay. There at the James Ranch, where their average length of stay is 6 to 8 months, being able to have a similar program, if we adopted that, if we chose to based on your recommendation, we could do that with more pods and more kids to be able to have access to that service.
So that's what I'm trying to get clear on, is that you did what I do all the time and said this, kept referring to it as this, but this would be the adoptability program, which obviously as a residual is a therapy program at the same time. Is that what we're talking about, sort of expanding or moving over to the ranch as well? Or is it something lesser or more or equal?
I think it's an opportunity for both, to be quite honest with you. At the ranch, we have the option, if so recommended, to bring that same program over there so that a lot of kids can benefit from that.
And I don't mean to be evasive. I'm for that. So just so you know,
Sure.
I'm for bringing over having adoptability therapy programs in both places. But I was trying to figure out if that's what you're recommending, or if you're just trying to give us an option to do one or the other, and then obviously then we can see if we're on the same page.
I think for sure that we can do that adoptability program there at the James Ranch.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So you need direction. What you'd be looking for is direction from us as to whether to do that or to get that contract to the Board of Supervisors.
Correct. Also, we put in the contract what we thought that the funding cost would be to expand that out there as well.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Clearer.
Yeah. So at the bottom of page 5, I'm just going to read this into the record. Should the Board of Supervisors direct the Probation Department to proceed with implementing a therapeutic animal-assisted therapy program for its juvenile facilities, the department recommends that a competitive solicitation process be conducted to identify a community-based organization that can implement this type of program. Ideally, this program could provide therapy dogs who rotate between the pods units for a set amount of time, days per week. Multiple dogs would be preferred to ensure that all pods and units and youth are able to interact with the animals on an ongoing basis. And I think we would want to, to that, we would add the adoptability opportunities at either location or both. And I think that the recommendation, what I'd like to recommend is that this committee forward to the board a recommendation to take such action. And instead of a do not, we have what we think the price is here. I think what I would prefer is that when this come to the board, we list that we think that's the price annually as we start. What I want is when the referral comes back that it has enough flexibility that if you see something that you find really interesting, that you can bring back to the board the option A, which is between 35 and 50, and any kind of other option that may include other kinds of animals. Because once you do a solicitation, you may find something out there that we just don't know yet.
Agreed.
Great.
So I think I'm for that, but the language that you were reading, I think it's under the paragraph identified modality for juvenile facilities. Okay. What I was trying to clarify, Supervisor Chavez, is when you, with the sentence starting with ideally, comma, such a program could provide therapy dogs, and then earlier in the paragraph, it's also described as a therapy program, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding that it's an adoptability and therapy program, because there are therapy.
Okay. That's what I added verbally. So
Got
what
it.
I said,
Okay.
yeah, for and or both facilities, because I think, Dave, if we give kind of a broad recommendation that includes all of those, that we'll get something really interesting back.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just had a little bit of concern that a therapy program is good, but it's a subset of the more, the greater opportunity of having an adoptability program as well. So it sounds like that's where we're headed. And can I just say, for whatever it's worth, in addition to the correction facilities that have worked with this kind of therapy, there's a tremendous amount of evidence-based work being done in universities as adjunct to behavioral health services in some of the major universities across the country, trying to intervene with students who are, having significant therapeutic need in terms of behavioral health issues in utilizing this kind of opportunity for them. So I just wanted to point that out as another, not that you shouldn't close your order book right now, since you got the direction, at least from here, but if that question were to come up again at the Board of Supervisors or later as to where else do we know this works, and it was a great question Supervisor Chavez asked. It would be interesting to see what those evidence-based experiences at the university level, in terms of intervention with students who are not incarcerated but are experiencing some of the same types of behavioral health issues. What kind of outcomes are they getting, I guess is what I'm putting out there. I'm presuming because they do it, they're getting good outcomes, but that isn't always a good assumption, right? So, thank you.
Good. All right, so do you feel like you know what we're asking?
Yeah.
Could you bring this back in May
Sure.
to the full board? Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to move on to item 6, and this is our JWU recommendations.
Good afternoon. Katja de Groot, Program Manager for the Office of Mediation and Ombud Services. Thank you, Chair Chavez and committee members. This afternoon, I will be providing a high-level overview of how the JWU's partnership with the Department of Family and Children's Services works to improve the way all involved experience the child welfare system. For the JWU to be useful, people have to know about the office and understand how it works. Conversely, the JWU needs to know about the child welfare system and understand how it works so the office can develop the best options for its visitors and provide informed system improvement recommendations. To do so, the JWU conducts broad outreach to the community, including presenting at DFCS parent orientations, and participates as a neutral in select DFCS and system partner meetings. Additionally, the JWU-DFCS relationship is such that the JWU has access to the policies, procedures, best practices, and most importantly, the social workers and administrative staff of the department so that the JWU can work with the DFCS to address visitor concerns and make smart recommendations. People come to the JWU because they have concerns and or questions about a child welfare case. For this reporting period, the JWU served 76 visitors and reviewed a total of 155 issues. The most prominent issue categories of visitor articulated concerns pertain to social worker behavior and communication. For those cases where the visitor waived confidentiality, the JWU worked in a quasi-mediative role to raise the visitor's concerns to the department, facilitate review, and provide opportunities for increased mutual understanding. During this process, the JWU recommended ways to improve the communication, engagement, and conflict dynamics. The DFCS has been receptive to the suggestions and has been proactive in working with the JWU to redress the majority of visitor concerns. In addition to case-specific redress, the JWU identified a trend emerging from visitor concerns pertaining to Child and Family Team, CFT, meetings, and developed forward-focused system improvement recommendations for the department's consideration. The DFCS, in turn, responded to the recommendations with actionable follow-up items and projected timelines to increase participants' understanding of the newly implemented CFT meetings. A full discussion of the upward feedback and DFCS response can be found in the jointly developed matrix that is attached to the JWU report. By facilitating redress of visitor concerns, shining a light on trends, and providing opportunities to improve communication and conflict dynamics, the JWU DFCS partnership worked to decrease conflict, provide avenues for people to move forward, increase satisfaction with the system experience, and ultimately improve outcomes for children. I'd like to add that this is an ongoing, continuous process and a work in progress. Finally, the JWU, as one of the neutral programs within the Office of Mediation and Ombuds Services, aims to create a communication culture within the county that invites people to be heard and reduces conflict. In that regard, we are reaching out to and working collaboratively with county departments by convening, consulting, and customizing neutral conflict resolution services to help strengthen their ability to support the public and your constituents. We look forward to sharing more with you in future reports. Thank you.
Great. Francesca, did you have anything to add?
Sorry. Francesca Ledred, Director of the Department of Family and Children's Services. No, I want to just emphasize that the relationship with JWU and the Department of Family and Children's Services has resulted in very actionable items. We meet at least once a week. If you think about the times that Katja is meeting with the program manager and then the assistant director, myself, and then she also attends our partners and operations meeting to talk about the ongoing themes so that we can address the issues on a timely basis. So I think that we have strengthened our partnership and our collaboration, and our work product, if you will, shows improvement, especially because we have actually seen a decrease in the number of visitors to the Ombudsman's office, and I think that shows that we are improving our systems and operations.
So just a couple of broad comments. One is, I think these reports are really important and really appreciate the, particularly making sure that we have the trending information, because I think that's really critical. And I think the other point that Francesca just raised is really critical too, in terms of how we look and talk about the effectiveness of the partnership. And so, for example, there were just two issues that I wanted to better understand, and that is, or make a request, and that is that for each period of the report, I think being able to say the total number families that are in our system, because I think one of the things that you want to be able to demonstrate is that everybody knows how to access the system, so that we're not looking at the decline and saying, oh, we're not doing a good job of getting out there, but really we can say, no, the decline is based on these following steps that we've taken, and understanding those steps has been more productive and more helpful. So that would just be one request. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I'm really excited that we have a really wonderful staff that's relatively new, and we're already working very deeply on trying to create a report that's going to be more useful and relevant. So the types of information you're asking for are ones that our office is already starting to work on, in addition to conversations that Francesca and I have about making the report something that's very useful for the department as well. So with regard to the total number of families in the system, I think that's certainly information we can provide. And we are also, the key part of all of the neutral services programs and the people, what we really want to do is listen. And I know that we had, the youth speakers earlier today, and one of the areas that we're working on actively now is to try to have a broader understanding of the concerns that are coming from foster youth. So that is an area that we are starting to engage in, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that works, and we'll work in collaboration with the department to gain more information, both with regard to statistics and data with regard to those youth, and also working more with the hub and with the non-minor dependent unit, as well as the rest of your team.
That's excellent, because I think, and it kind of brings me to the other point I wanted to raise, is that as it relates to the social worker behavior and communication, in some respects, it's good that it's interesting to me that they were 1 and 2, because almost all the time that we have conflict, it's because of a lack of communication or appropriate communication, and I even looked at the cultural competency, and it seems to me that those probably could be they're probably very often very aligned. I raise that because while I think that this idea around frequently asked questions is a really good way to give people much more clarity, I'm wondering, have we put up yet a database, a website for around our foster youth programming overall, so people have there's a place they can go online and better understand what foster care is and what the system is, and does that exist yet?
It's in the process. We're actually working with our TSS to revamp the entire SSA website. We recognize that there's a lot of limitations to what we currently have in place. And that's why the hub is such an important place for our foster youth. So it's not in place in the best way, and it is being worked on.
So I think good SSA, but I'm really looking at foster care.
Yes.
So for foster care, what is the ETA on, and here's the kind of things we wanted to make sure people had access to. What kind of services are available? What happens if you're this age or this age? It's something that everybody from an emancipated youth or a child who wants to be emancipated to a parent who has had a child removed can use. And I'm wondering, what is the ETA on that product?
I will definitely get back to you on the ETA, but we are actually developing the website so that it will have a map, and you will be able to drill down, like what stage are you in, a drill down so that the information is there.
Like
so
a drop
we're trying to make it, interactive, so there's better understanding. Right now it's all narrative, and it's really difficult to navigate.
Oh, and also it's not, you would have, like, for example, the Intern and Earn program that we have, the hub, all of that. It's just, you just have no idea what your resources are. And even a family, by the way, a family that's at risk, who do I call? Like, so good. Yeah, I'd love to know the ETA. And if there's, to me, I think the whole, transparency is kind of something I know we need to get to, but on this particular topic, it's just so critical. And I think as part of our it was one of the first issues that came out of the Joint Foster Youth Task Force, because I think most people didn't know that it wasn't an easy thing to be able to go to one place and find information. And frankly, I was really surprised too, but good, great. Thanks, Francesca, that it's on your to-do list. And then the last issue I wanted to raise relative to the to communication and the like. I feel like our social workers, especially the case carrying ER, the whole team of people that are really interacting with families who are in crisis, like the amount of just tension and all that they have to suffer with too, is something that I'm concerned that after years of doing this, that the kind of the layers of stress and trauma that end up on individuals get expressed in all kinds of ways. And I know that there's been a lot of research and study done on this relative to public safety officers. But often a lot of what they're seeing is what your social workers are seeing as well. And I've never read or seen any kind of research on how trauma impacts people who stay in this field of work. And really the reason I'm asking the question is that it appears that I'm really wanting to understand, I'm sorry I'm grappling with this, but here's the outcome of what I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to understand retention, like healthy retention for people who do this work that are really skilled at it, because by the time we train someone and get them skilled, it feels like we've pretty much burned them out. And I just don't know if there's a body of research that exists that you've already been looking at, or if that's something we need to take a look at as part of even the JWU side, which is when people are upset about how many cases they have or new changes we're making. I've had a bunch of folks come talk to me about a reorg that they're panicked about, and those are all fair questions, right? Because we're asking people to do quite a lot.
It's great. I'm really glad that you're asking that question now, because our office in the Ombuds and Mediation Services is actually looking at how we can serve the county agencies and departments in a better way. And and one of the areas is something that I have on my agenda actually to talk to Francesca about, and that is we are starting to get calls from social workers to our office. And I'd like to discuss a way, maybe, Francesca, that there might be a model we can create to help Francesca understand what some of those concerns might be. They would still be certainly, confidential conversations to our office, but we can aggregate data with regard to the types of issues and types of concerns that would arise. And I think that it is something that is, with the reorganization, is something we anticipate we may be getting some increasing numbers into our offices. So, thank you.
And I would just add that there is, I think, a pretty significant body of work around the vicarious trauma in behavioral health, mental health systems, and child welfare systems. And we certainly do look at that as part of what it is that we can put in place to support staff. We can also work to support to share some of that with you.
That would be great, because one thing I'll just point out is that I don't know if this is accurate, but I was talking to one social worker who made this point about us changing the hours that they work from 8 to 8 to 7 to 7. And for a lot of people who have childcare issues, that seems like not a strategic move. And so what I was wondering is, as we think about actions that for many reasons have benefits to the organization, right? We've got a lot of area we have to cover. We have a lot of kids. How do we work on who's covering what? I get that these are always more complicated than one single part of it, but it does seem to me that where we have options to on the front end have conversations or even surveys that where they're appropriate, that it would cause us to pull less on the wrong strings and more on the right strings. And because let me just say, as you all know, I'm like I've been an advocate for foster youth, and I'm really about like us making it happen. And I was very unhappy with the CAN Center, and I know I caused a lot of stress because I didn't want the phone calls to be answered at 60%. They needed to be where they are now. All the things I think are right to do, but we want to be able to, I think what we have to figure out is how do we, while we're going through this whole transformation, how do we do it in a way that feels mutually supportive, even though we've got to go in a direction that may be different for people. So anyway, that's a bigger question, and not just related to this issue, but just more broadly.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. I think there's a lot of circumstances where, we say a lot of what we do is based on law and regulation. When it changes, we got to act, and like I said, we kind of do that at any cost. And
right.
When we don't have to do that, we recognize that, some consensus and some conversation are important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One thing that I would just want to recommend, Katja, and I'm sure you're already doing this, but I have found county council and the whistleblower program in particular to be helpful in terms of thinking about, and probably it's worth getting OED involved in it too, but just to have a broader conversation about how we get information and how we interact with people in the right, with the right pathways, so that both that people are listened to, they feel listened to, and that we have the capacity to follow up with them, because in some of our systems, we're still having challenges even letting people know that we heard them, forget whether or not we acted on what they asked us for. But I think as we are dealing more and more with employees and with the community, we've got to do a more refined job of that. The only negative feedback, and I've only had this happen a couple times that I've gotten about JWU, is people not necessarily understanding what the impacts of their complaints were. And I think that these are really frustrated, scared, angry people. So I'm not, and I say that across our system, like I get that that's who we're dealing with. But I didn't really, I didn't really know how to respond to that. So anyway, if you could help us think about that as well.
Yes, that's an important question for us to really reflect on. And we are always, just like every other department in the county, trying to, listen and improve, and we'll dive a little deeper into that. And with your permission, I might have some conversations with Amy so she can provide me a little bit more understanding.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you.
And actually, we get in our offices, we get so many different kinds of complaints, because we get them from foster youth, we get them from parents, we get them from employee. I mean, we really get a cacophony of those too, and us being able to pull those apart are very difficult. So this is really appreciated.
Sure.
So I don't have anything else, and Supervisor Cortese doesn't. So thank you very much, both of you, and keep up the good work. And we'll learn more about how the communication and how we support our employees, but still make sure that we're doing the right thing out in the field. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, item 7. This is to receive a report from Social Services regarding timely dental and medical exams.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Dan Little, Assistant Director with DFCS.
Laura Rosas, Ethics and Compliance Officer for the County Health System.
Oh, there you go. Would you do that again?
Sure, sorry. Laura Rosas, Ethics and Compliance Officer for the County Health System.
Thank you.
So today's report is a response to a previously submitted report in March to provide some additional information related to 3 specific items. And at the end, I'll wrap it up. I think the overarching question is, when are we going to ensure that 100% of our youth in our system are getting
That's
timely
right.
medical
Skip to
and
the
dental?
end. All right, good.
So I'll go over with these, and then I'll kind of go to the last bit,
Yeah,
which
no
is kind of
problem.
some of our next steps. So regarding the authority to consent, there was a process that was developed to ensure that all of our youth entering into our system, we're obtaining the appropriate consents from the parents. So there was some work that we had to do with the unions. That's been done. That's set to implement the end of April. We also have a opportunity to have an identified staff member that when there are consent issues that come up from the provider community, that they'll have a designated person that they can go to. So I think that's going to expedite some of that process and hopefully eliminate some of the confusion, the back and forth, which should hopefully lead to some increased timeliness for those services. The second component was the medical and dental information. I think there was a concern and some questions about what information can and can't be shared and what processes are currently in place within the county to share information. So there is a current procedure in place that impacts a large percentage of our youth, especially youth that are connected with Valley Medical Center services. So for that, if I can turn it over to just provide a brief overview of what does that system look like, what does it provide, what doesn't it provide, and some next steps that potentially we're going to do with that.
Sure. So we have EpiCare Link, which is part of our HealthLink system, which is Epic. And through EpiCare Link, we have a number of providers that include our community-based organizations, and there's a list here in the report, as well as the SCIPA providers who can actually access their patients' information and send referrals. So that will allow them to see that information. We've also streamlined information coming in from other providers so it can be entered into HealthLink through our HIM department when the data is coming from an external provider.
You do that?
The EpiCare Link we've streamlined it about 3 weeks ago, a month ago, when we met internally and sat down with our HIM department to ensure that it would work smoothly and we had everything in place.
And is this operationalized?
Yes.
And so we're testing it now and seeing how we're doing and educating people and?
Yes.
How long will it take us to know what the impact of that action has been in terms of, back to the point Dan raised about making more timely appointments?
Mm-hmm. We can do an audit on it in a month or so.
That's great. Good. Thank you.
And I think the last question that came out was the question about continuity of care. So this month, the public health nurses are going to begin participation in the child and family team meeting. When we have families, children are identified to reunify with parents, those public health nurses then can attend that CFT meeting to help that transition piece to make sure that the information that is contained within that CFT transitions to that care of those parents in the home. Beginning in May.
And Dan, just to back up on that, does that mean like physical paperwork, or does it also mean the password for an access portal that gives you the information for the child?
I think right now is to ensure that if there are issues with coverage or medical coverage, that the processes are known, and then there's somebody that's able to help with that, those parents walk through that process to make sure that anything that needs to be in place prior to that youth going into that parental home, that we're getting those things done prior to that reunification.
So I've never asked this question. I may be asking it inappropriately, but do we have, for my son is a student, and I have a link when he started school that had his portal, like I know what his grades are. He doesn't like that, and there's a bunch of other information just about him that I can access whenever I need to have an argument with them. So I'm wondering, do we have something similar for foster parents? Are they able to, so for example, using this new mechanism, can they get all information on the child that they would need, like what a parent would have for their own child?
Going back, I think, to the system is really set up for the provider community. What it can look like for our caregiver community, I think, is a different thing that we're going to need to explore to see what's available.
So let's make sure we keep that on our work plan. And the only reason is that the way this issue came to us was actually from caregivers having problems accessing information for the child, like even for themselves knowing where the child was in their dental appointments or any of that kind of stuff as an example.
Okay. Yep.
Great. Go ahead, Dan. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, so continuity of care, that the public health nurses will actually, starting in May, will start connecting directly with parents instead of just the CFTPs, they'll connect one-on-one with the parents to, again, help with that transition of information to ensure that there's any questions answered. It doesn't get to the question that you just posed, but it does help to alleviate some of the misunderstandings and confusion and ensuring that any services are in place for the medical care of that youth continue when that youth is placed with the parents, and the parents understand what are the upcoming appointments, what are the needs of that youth, and then the public health nurse can help them assist with connecting up with those interventions. The next thing I think, which is the overarching question that I think has been asked for us to answer, is when are we going to ensure that above and beyond these individual interventions, that all of our youth are getting their timely medical and dental care. I think DFCS currently now has some of the infrastructure in place to begin doing that analysis. Starting next week, we have some staff dedicated within each of our divisions and bureaus that are solely responsible for doing data analysis and data support for the teams. So those staff are going to do that in conjunction with Jackie, who presented last month, to do a full file review to say, for the misses that we've had, for the youth that are showing that they didn't have timely medical and dental, what was the reason behind that? I think we have some interventions in place based on what we thought was some of the reasons, but we need to do a full 100% review to say what is actually happening in each and every one of those situations. So we anticipate that review starting next week will run through the middle of June, and that'll give us about 30 days to do an analysis of those. So by the middle of July, we should have some findings and start being able to implement some of the interventions based on that full file review.
That's great. So when would you be able to come back and sort of give us an update?
So, I think if we can get our analysis done by the end of July, then the additional time to do any kind of write-up for a report. The analysis we're hoping to be done by the middle of July.
Okay.
Yep.
So maybe it makes sense for us to revisit this topic in September?
I think that should give us enough time.
And while doing that, could you make sure that we have taken at least a healthy swing at how we get the caregiver access to the same information in the same portal? And then last thing that I just want to, I'm mentioning it to you, but really this is something that, again, is part of our foster care task force work, is how we are able to provide consistent services irrespective of what the label on the child was. So I know we're going to start looking at prevention, and I think that may actually put more kids in I don't mean in the system, but in our pipeline for services. And so at some point, we're going to have a discussion about whether or not we have to change that definition or the implications of the definition in terms of how we provide services to the family and the child. But also, on this point, I mean, I think we see, at least my experience from talking to young people, is that their status is still very fluctuating. We have a lot to fix about the system because I think we caused some of that, but some of it's out of our control. But how do we still make sure that the child doesn't lose access to services while they're going through a transition? I know it's a complicated question. What it really means is, when does a general fund kick in, and how do we do that? And I get that, but I would at least like to answer the question so we would be able to talk to our colleagues to determine whether or not they'd be interested in an investment. So, very good. Thank you very much. I don't have anything else on this. Do you, Dave?
No, other than to say it's an excellent plan.
And thank you. You're moving forward. I know this is, I can't imagine how hard it is, but thank you for getting it going.
Thank you.
All right. Now for the fun part, we're on the budget. I hear the woohoos out there. So we're going to go to item 8A, and this is social services budget. And I thought, Bob, I would be interested in getting an overview.
Sure.
Thank you.
Just pull up some slides here. So I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to present our work here on our budget, work that began in the fall and wrapped up in January. I wanted to talk a little bit about what the kind of the construct and our marching orders were around the development of the budget. I think we've heard from the county exec on a number of occasions, the concerns of where revenue will go in this upcoming year, that we're looking at that area where we're likely to plateau. We want to make sure what we're doing at this point is certainly sustainable, and we definitely took that to heart in our effort. Overall, we put a budget request together this year that does include some expansion requests to the tune of around $13 million in total. That would have a general fund impact of a little under $9.5 million. In addition to that, what you'll see on our formal submission is that some contracts from the Office of Immigrant and Refugees will move over to us, and that's in the value of around $5 million. So even though that looks like an expansion request totaling $17 million, it's actually less than that due to that movement. Overall, that I think is a pretty modest request. It's less than 1% of our overall budget, but we feel it does address some critical needs that we have. The state budget, I think, presented us with some good news. At long last, there was resolution to some items that had been kind of stuck, items that we were excited about from a policy perspective. A couple of those are just the IHSS MOE issue that had been kind of in a holding pattern for a couple of years, is resolved in the governor's proposed budget. We're hopeful that that will continue through the formal budget process and be passed. There's also other policy areas where we're excited about, including expansion in the CalWORKS grant levels to bring folks up to still a modest level, but at least it brings everybody up to 50% of federal poverty level and accelerates the process that was already in place to do that. So that's exciting in that respect. In terms of the overall budget and the ask, we're hopeful that much of what we present in this budget request will be funded for a couple different reasons. One is through the rigorous work of our finance folks and our advocacy in Sacramento, we continue to bring down some one-time revenue money. There's a couple different sources of that. One is just Medi-Cal administration that we've been fight on for a long time. And it's very, very difficult to get the state to settle up on that, but they did agree this year to reallocate some money to us to the tune of about $4 million. In addition to that, we mentioned the fix for IHSS and the MOE. One of the things that it proposes to do is to accelerate the funding that we would receive under realignment. Typically, that's a process that lags for several months, and it's hard to do your budgeting based on that. In order to clean up this issue, they'll accelerate that, and that's to the tune of over $1 million. So in our budget alone, there's some one-time revenue, I think, that will help us along in that. Although it's not apples, it's a little bit of apples and oranges in this case. The MOE fix also frees up revenue in the county. It's a windfall to us of what funds would have otherwise been obligated by the general fund. To the tune to $9 to $10 million. So even though it doesn't necessarily, so the fix in the IHSS MOE, it's about $1.5 billion in the state, and our piece of that will be about $9 to $10 million, hopefully somewhere in that range. So overall, even though it's maybe not program to program, the general fund will benefit from our funding overall, and we're hopeful much of that will be redirected into our programs and not supplanted to fund other things. So we're rooting on that and cheering for that kind of resolution.
So when you think about that based on the budget that you have before us, what are the opportunities? And really, I guess I would be wondering why we would not reinvest some of that in.
Well, honestly, to be fair, we are not an enterprise fund, and we benefit from that. So when we overspend, the general fund will pick that up. So I don't want to not acknowledge that in our programs, the county does overmatch.
I get that.
Right. So in the sense of fair play, we want to say, we understand that, but we would love to receive the full value of that and receive our request.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I see. And that full value being what you prioritized here.
Yeah.
I guess the only question I would have is after looking at this, I have a few areas that I'm really interested in making sure I understand.
Right.
And one of them is if before we get into the budget cycle, even if it's off agenda, if you could give to the board the Joint Foster Care Task Force list of things that that are being funded and even that aren't. And the reason I say that is I know right away you all started acting on some of them that I think we want to be able to acknowledge that we're moving. And then there are others where I need to know where the hole in the donut is so that as I talk to my colleagues, I can better make our case. And then, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that does. I mean, I think we can crosswalk that for you.
Great. And then one other thing I just wanted to better understand from you relative to the state budget. I know that the governor is new and that there's some initiatives that may or may not be coming out in process, and some of those look like they're going to come out by the time our budget's done, like child care, resources for child care, for example. How are you, I know that you don't have a crystal ball. What are the implications for some of those social services issues that he's pretty interested in that could really benefit us in terms of our budgeting process?
So I think the safest thing to say is it's unclear. We are excited about some of the things we're hearing, but in general, he's also just getting staffed up. I mean, his Health and Human Service secretary just started last week. He's not scheduled to even meet with our folks in our advocacy and for another several weeks to a month. So I think a lot of that, we don't have, for CDSS, we don't have a director yet. So a lot of this is sort of in the holding pattern limbo of just even on our current stuff. So I think some of that's just going to have to play out timing-wise to get the folks on board to then establish the priorities.
Well, let me just ask, this is why I'm asking the question. I have been wondering whether or not, as part of our budget, if it made sense for us to put some money in reserve, particularly to draw down child care dollars. And the reason is that, at least in the discussions that I've had with folks in Sacramento, that there's opportunities for money to start becoming available, particularly around child care, but that it will have some component of a matching fund. Primarily on, this is kind of intriguing to me, but primarily on the capital side. They're looking at some one-time dollars, and I don't know if that's something that you've heard too, and you're thinking about how we can do that.
We certainly have, and I think I don't know that we've invested a lot of time and energy yet into the mechanics of it. The difficulty with childcare is it crosses so many different systems and constituencies, so we're a piece of that, but I think it's probably a larger conversation of getting all the interested parties together to puzzle through who has funding for what, for the match and that kind of thing.
That's a really good point. Thank you.
So as part of our budget, what we tried to do is focus on two areas. One, we always say, is our non-discretionary area. So we have caseload pressures. We'll put that out there to say we need funding to address the administrative needs in the programs to do that. For the remainder of our budget requests, the other items that you'll see in there are related to, I think, three of our strategic priorities. So one is just generally around program integrity. The second is around prevention and work that we can do to move our entire agency upstream, and some of the work that we're very excited to do, which we do in small bites now, but to really take bigger bites of that, and the budget reflects that. And the third is just strengthening our system around accountability, outcome measures, research, and those kind of efforts. So what I can do is quickly go through each of the departments, and I'll highlight just what our requests are and what it relates to in terms of our strategic priorities. Starting with DFCS, we have a request for about 15 additional staff. What you see there is a request for management analysts in the Administrative Support Bureau. What we're looking for there is to strengthen, again, our ability to do our administrative work, but monitor our outcomes and be much more outcome focused and driven in the work that we do. There's one request in here for some extra help around some administrative staff. This really relates to the reorg and helping staff up to that. But what we also recognize is that we need to do an in-depth analysis of all the administrative functions that we have, and we've embarking upon that. We want to do an efficiency study, so what we'd like to do is just get some extra help on board to handle the transition we're in now as part of the reorg, and then come forward with the results of what we do through our efficiency study. Caseload related, you see a request for a couple social work supervisors to deal with bringing ratios down as it relates to caseload. We have an ask for some modest ask for increasing some of our existing contracts. And again, a lot of that relates to the prevention work that we're ramping up. We see good success in going upstream in differential response. We see success in parent advocate support and what that can mean for moving things forward. Additionally, there's a request for one social work position that funds currently what's funded by a grant, and that's the Wendy's Wonderful Kids program. So we plugged that in there too. Moving on to DEBS, the programs in DEBS currently are fairly flat or even still declining because of the strength in the economy. So there's not a lot here in terms of ask on the staffing level other than program integrity related requests. And this relates specifically to, this is a request that's been out there in the past. It's a request for eligibility examiners around the CalFresh program. What we're trying to do here is bolster our quality assurance and focus on our error rate. Our error rate currently is below a sanction level, but it's close enough to be sweating it a little bit. And what we could do by having additional quality assurance staff, this is definitely a kind of an evidence-based approach where by having the staff on board, we know we can drive the error rate down by doing more examination work. And what we do there is avoid any threat of being sanctioned through error rate should we ever have to go above that. And that's not a great situation because there you're just giving money back to the feds and you're getting nothing for it. So we want to try to avoid that. Additionally, on the prevention front, we have a request for some outreach activity staff. And again, this is to think about where we're underserving. We know our penetration in certain programs, despite the cost of living here, is under what it should be. We know in the CalFresh program, we do not have the penetration rate that we would like to see. If we can do more advocacy work, we know we can do better prevention work and help out our penetration rates. But also, I think this is vital when we talk about Medi-Cal and ensuring that we have the maximum number of enrollees in the Medi-Cal program to also support VMC.
So can I ask this question? Is that your two associate management analysts?
Yes. Yeah.
Why are they management analysts?
Because that's what we have. I know, John, if we don't have necessarily like an outreach position, so.
Really? We don't have one anywhere in the county?
We don't. I don't know if there's something else somewhere that we're missing, but.
Typically in the recommended budget process, when departments submit requests to OBA and the county executive, they indicate the job classification that they believe best describes the duties of the position that they're seeking to add. Subsequent to that submission, as part of the administration's review of department budget submittals, ESA also reviews the job duty statement, because along with the submission from the department for any positions that they're seeking to add, they also submit job duty statements, which are basically a description of the duties and responsibilities of the position. And then ESA verifies whether or not the classification that the department's requesting is appropriate. So to the extent that associate management analyst is not the appropriate classification for the duties described, if this specific request is funded in the county executive's recommended budget, you should see the appropriate job classification reflected there.
So do we have outreach workers?
We do, not having the duty statement in front of me here,
I just was
right?
curious about the general topic of, and the only reason I say that is that I worry a little. What's opportunistic about associate management analysts is that that's a great way for someone who gets into the organization to be able to move up.
Around.
And so I don't want to taint that, but it does seem to me that from a public information officer or a real actual community engagement specialist, like someone who's a real organizer, would just be really I just was curious about it, because again, I don't want to stop people from moving up, so I get that, but it
Yes.
also seems kind of odd. Okay.
And we do have community workers, we have community outreach specialists, public outreach. So we have various job classifications. So it would require a
All right,
little
I didn't mean to
analysis to
take us
see
down
which
a rabbit
fits.
hole. It just was intriguing to me. I didn't understand the title relative to the request.
Right.
Thank you.
And finally, in DEBS, we have some decision support positions we're requesting. A couple of these are related to what we've mentioned from time to time, and what will actually be coming before the board in the next session is work around the new CalSAWS eligibility system. That system is going to move into a single system across the state. It's going to require significant work at each county level in terms of developing the system requirements, as well as developing the implementation plan and data conversion plans and that kind of thing. So we need to staff up for some of that. And finally, there's a welfare fraud investigator included in here. This is something you've seen in the past, and what we typically say here is that with the work that they do always pays for itself several times over in terms of the fraud prevention that they're able to handle. So moving on to Aging and Adult Services. Here we have a request for a total of 28 positions, a pretty hefty request, but the explanation there is, again, caseload driven, and IHSS in general has been in that holding pattern and is understaffed at this point. With the resolution to the maintenance of effort issue, we're hopeful that we can get back to a point where we can staff back up in this program and get to a point where we're hitting our compliance numbers, which we're slipping on at the moment just because of workload issues. Other requests in here in the APS, we have a request for a management analyst for Home Safe. That was a grant that we mentioned we received some short time ago. Also for some public health nurse and social worker ones. Again, here the effort is focus on prevention and prevention work. In public guardian, what we have is, again, what we have here is a caseload focus. We have continued, demographically upward pressure on this body of business. But also what I would say is, as we all know, I think people's finances and the work that we do around that just gets more and more complicated and more complex, and we need a couple more positions there to handle some of the complexity that's happening in that arena. Senior Nutrition Program, we have a request for a management analyst to handle some of the transportation services. This relates to the unwinding of outreach transportation services, and we've handled that in the past couple of years through extra help, and it's getting to the point where that's not a meaningful way to take care of this, so we'd like to staff up to do that. Seniors Agenda it continues to be an exciting area, a successful area, a lot of energy around, and what we'd like to be able to do is actually add a staff person to that program and a little bit of additional funding to do a second symposium during the year. Again, that I think just helps meet the mission of the work that's happening with the Seniors Agenda and getting the community focused on that age-friendly action plan. And finally, what we've also included in here is the work around the Adult Day Services subsidy pilot. There's work that has happened in the past to study this. Recommendations have been made. Those have come before the committee. And what we have here is a request for a 3-year pilot for 225 client subsidies that would total about $2.3 million. And again, what we hope in that case is that we would address prevention work that would be helpful for folks being able to remain in a less costly care setting. Finally, information on the director's office. What we're looking for here is a total of about 9 positions. And again, what we're largely focused on here is work around outcomes, increased accountability. We see that in our contracts office. That's work we're trying to do to bolster the work that they're doing so that our contracts can be very outcome driven, very accountable. We also have a request for a couple management analysts in our Office of Community and Board Relations. Again, what we're looking for here is a lot of outreach and communication work as it relates to connecting with the community and doing more work there around increasing our prevention footprint and messaging. And we also have a request for an administrative services manager, management analyst around employee relations and wellness. And honestly, this gets back to the very issue that we were just discussing around making sure as an organization we're able to address employee concerns and needs and making sure we're a well, healthy organization. We are bootstrapping that, and I think what we've been able to do just with having a couple people do this as kind of extra activity has been remarkable. And the response has been a solid foundation of making sure we continue to have this prevention agenda with our own staff. Additionally, we have a request for a management analyst and some additional funding for wage subsidies around intern and earn and LEAP. And again, this is just to expand the scope of that program. We've had great success with it. We've actually thoroughly enjoyed being part of it and working with the youth. And this would be an exciting opportunity to expand some of that. We have a request on the research side for a senior research and evaluation specialist. And again, this is about outcomes, focusing on the research that we need to do and being intentional around the startup of all the work that we're doing and having staffing to support that. On the staff development side, again, a research specialist to focus on outcomes, ensuring that what we're doing from a training perspective is effective. We get a lot of feedback of folks who go through our inductions. Our work is complex. They go through lengthy inductions, and at best, we're trying to create structure in our training for folks to follow, but at the same time, it isn't always as nuanced as it needs to be. And what we want to do is do a deeper dive there, do some more research around how we can do better training and induction, have our folks arrive in the workforce able to be more agile, able to be more empowered in their decision making, things of that nature. And as I mentioned, the final item there is just the Office of Immigrant Relations. I think I invoked a name from the past that I did around refugee and immigrants. It's Immigrant Relations, and the contract's moving over to us for administration, not really for the programming piece of it, but for our administrative support. And that's the value of about $4.7 million. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I think I've interrupted you with all mine. Do you have any questions, Dave?
I guess comments or questions if you want to respond to them, Bob, on the adult and aging services, or aging adult services, I should say. Over the years, we've been talking about trying to sort of calibrate necessary growth in the division with actual demographic growth in the community. And I know that so far the senior nutrition program and some of the services themselves are keeping up. Yeah. Obviously, they're keeping up. But does this number do that for you, if indeed it ends up in the budget?
I think that on IHSS, I think it's a pretty solid number, but we're still concerned over what I would say is sort of a lack of focus from the state perspective of where should this program go? Right now, there's not a lot of focus on managing the growth of the program. Are there things that we really need to do to take a harder look at that? And we remain concerned around that. And I think there needs to be a meaningful conversation around what kind of work is expected at that level when we engage with folks in IHSS. I think it would be we have to do some administrative work, but when we talk about prevention and being able to do deeper work on that, the IHSS program is not one from a state perspective we monitor from a quality perspective. Are we getting good outcomes and results from that? And there's work we would like to do around that to more fully answer that question and have that tie to the APS work that we do. On the APS side, the request that we have, I think it it addresses what we have for the time being, but as we've shared with you, we continue to see the numbers go up. And I would say that that's good for the time being, but I think it's probably going to need to be revisited again in the near future.
Yeah, it seems like at some point, Supervisor Chavez, a work session just on, on IHSS is obviously, I think we all get it. There's huge concern there, and you and I have visited workers recently, and we understand the pressure everybody's under. I get that. I'm just on this broader level of, it's almost an actuarial analysis of, okay, if it's a cross between actuarial analysis, I think, and then budgetary efficiency, right? Because you don't just add people one-to-one or resources one-to-one with actuarial growth, but you would have to tell us, we can scale at this ratio based on the growth of the population, in these different areas, whether it's senior nutrition. I mean, IHSS for now obviously is a moving target, but in all the areas that relate to the various definitions of seniors, over 55, over 60, over 65, an area just seems to me that we can't get caught flat-footed because somebody really gets hurt on the other end instantly if we're under-resourced.
Yeah, it's definitely our pain point, as we've always shared. Adult services from a federal perspective and a state perspective just don't get the funding that they need, and part of our advocacy this year is around adult and aging services, and some of it is just simple. On the child welfare side, there's significant investment in social worker training funds, CalSWEC and the work that they do, and it is minimal at best on the adult side, and that kind of parity and equity needs to get addressed, and I think it'd be great to have a conversation.
The qualitative side of it as well as what you're saying.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not suggesting, maybe this is maybe it's kind of a two-step, a study session or work session or, some extra time spent on what resources would be needed to really go out and map the future. And then, that if that was done sometime halfway through this fiscal year, at least we would be set up for you to ask for those actual resources. Because I think we'd be a little unfair to ask the department to, somehow internally become, just take on an actuarial study and sort of recast the budget or give us a projected recast budget. But for consultants to come in, economists to come in and do that, I think it's worth investing in. That's just my 2 cents. And then the other
on that one issue follow up. I think that's a really good idea. And one thing that I would recommend, because I actually think one of the challenges you have in terms of making the case to the board is that I think the only times I've seen the presentations that show that the delta of the number of young people we're going to have here. I mean, what I fear is that all of Silicon Valley is going to look more like San Francisco someday, which is no place for kids because the people can't afford to live here. And so, so one thing I would recommend, Dave, is that I think it would be worth us, and I can work with Bob on this, but and your team on this, but is just putting a mini study session together for us. But I also think, as a part of that study session, to your point, we could shape that what we need to do to find the information we don't have and then bring that to the full board. But I think what would be great to bring to the full board is also just the sheer discussion around the demographics, because I think you're the only one, you'd been really steeped in it, and then I just asked some information about it, and then I freaked out. So we got to freak everybody out, I guess is the way to go here.
Yeah. No, that would be great.
The older I get, the more I freak out.
Yeah.
So, the other question I have is on, I didn't really mean that. That was a joke. On the outreach, again, just a comment. I'm not necessarily looking for any instant paradigm shift or anything like that, but unless there's an immediate response for some reason, and that is just great that we're investing investing in increased outreach activities, and I listened to the Q&A between you and Supervisor Chavez in terms of what all that means. There had been some discussion over the last few years, in terms of trying to create an outreach program in the agencies and divisions of the county, not just social services, where it would make sense to be able to activate folks. Almost the term I think of is one that a now retired political consultant coined years ago, called sidewalk strategies. But how do you use these analysts and folks who are internal to actually activate folks, on the public health side, on the social services side? We do effective jobs in certain areas of the county, especially around volunteers, retirees who want to volunteer, for example, parks volunteers. Sometimes they do a tremendous job, it seems like, of activating a couple thousand people a year who not only are helping, but are basically have their finger on the pulse as to what's going on in the county, so they become ambassadors and emissaries in the community. And it seems to me that probably social services is the one agency in the county that would understand that work the best because of all the various things that we do there. But somebody would have to lead that at some point. And I do think we always use that term deeper dive, but it's a little different strategy than just do we have enough management to manage basic outreach that's just going to get us the same old service delivery, as opposed to something much broader and much deeper in the community.
No, I agree, and I think that's part of with the Joint Foster Youth Task Force conversations. I mean, it's part of that conversation we're trying to have with ourselves around a culture shift, and to do some of that work in a meaningful way, and that kind of bringing in folks who have that kind of community organizing aptitude, and break away from there's some work we do and folks feel pretty comfortable with us. But there's a lot of work we do that folks don't feel that comfortable with us too, and we need to figure out the best way to approach that and recast ourselves in a different light, and create that energy to do that.
And my last question is, let me just make this as a request, a public request to sit down with you and talk about something that's come up in this committee in the past, which is peer court, and the probation department's been running that up till now. We've openly had discussions about whether that really belongs there, or whether it's, at this point, better run by someone else, assuming that resources are shifted accordingly. And I would like, having been the lead on the original initiative, to sit down with you and talk at some point in time as to whether or not those kinds of youth restorative justice programs really belong more on the social services side than the traditional probation side. It really harkens back for me to the first year I came in as board president, and made a couple of announcements on the justice side, like we're going to put juvenile hall out of business. But the second one was, to the extent we have that kind of a justice system for youth on the probation side, that maybe it should be split away from the adult side. And what came out of that was actually, I became convinced that wouldn't be a good idea, to do some kind of a split, but would make a lot more sense to essentially inject social services, social workers, sort of the professionals from the social service side in that area of work that is much more preventative. And you've done such a great job with Intern and Learn and some of these other programs that you talked about enjoying that. It just, I guess you got to watch what you invite, right?
Yeah, I know.
You enjoy it that much, How about peer court? But no, what I'm really saying is maybe it's time to start, emphasizing that idea of getting social services as an agency. I'm not just talking about outside wraparound services, but as an agency more involved in directing some of that traffic.
no, be happy to have that conversation.
Thank you.
Great. I think those are all our questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
To your staff who did all that work. It's a lot of it. I think that there are a number of other just smaller issues that I think are worth us thinking about. So I appreciate the opportunity to hear what you're thinking about and marry it to some of what we're thinking about. So thank you for that. We'll go on to 8B, and this is the Department of Child Support Services. I think. Oh, no, wait. Who's 8B? Let me grab my tab real quick. Okay, good. It is you. All right, great. Thank you, everyone, for your work.
So I'm filling in for Ignacio. He's not here today, and I am the deputy director. And I just wanted, this is going to be very brief. So DCSS is facing an unprecedented year of funding again. It's the same. We've been plat funded for the past 17 years now, and our budget continues to be approximately $37 million for fiscal year 2020. However, over the last 4 budget years, the department has eliminated its annual budget deficit while improving key performance measures and streamlining operations. Over the past 2 years, the department has basically positioned itself to absorb many of these costs on the within the department, like for example, on the negotiated salary increases and the operating costs. We've done that with our existing state funding allocation at no county cost to the county, and we haven't had any significant layoffs or budget reductions. The only layoffs, and they haven't really been layoffs, but we've had to eliminate positions. And I believe this year we are eliminating 9 vacant codes, but we're not doing any layoffs. And the department has been very, very busy over the past year. We've hired 53 positions. That includes new hires, transfers, and promotions. And more than half of these were senior child support officers or child support officers, which happens to be one of our core positions in the department. So the 2020 budget includes no request to add any additional positions. And that's it.
Thank you. I only had one question, and I'm actually not sure if it's for you or the Social Services Department, but does your department do any, after they do arbitration between couples, around child support, is there any purview you have outside of simply the child support amount? And what I mean is you don't get engaged in anything relative to family court or any of that?
No, not afterward, unless they're coming back to modify that order. Then we're engaged in going back to court. Or they'll come into the office and we'll try to get them to stipulate to modify the amount. But in terms of custody and visitation, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Or no,
Okay.
we do not.
Thank you. We have one comment on this, and I don't want to ask any more questions or have a further discussion of action until we hear from Scott Largent.
Ready when you are, Frank. Thank you. Lindsay that I brought in here, good afternoon, everybody. Scott Largent, you all know me. I brought Lindsay in here. She had been talking about the child support and the issues that she was having with the Department of Child Support Services. When they do the Smith-Osler bonuses, I believe is what it is, and I'm not completely familiar with this. I probably shouldn't come up here and start talking about things I don't really know much about, but when she received that payment, it showed on her account as her husband issuing a credit. So all her upcoming child support payments and alimony payments were credited back to her husband. So they did that for 5 different months. So, and what I'm hearing from a lot of women that I'm meeting down at family court is that the Department of Child Support Services just doesn't know how to process those properly. Now, I'm not sure. I believe that Wells Fargo is the main processing point for the financial end of things, but I'm just confused why they don't know how to do that in Silicon Valley. because what it did with her is it sent her into like, I mean, she literally could not pay her rent. She got a 3-day notice. You know, she couldn't get her medication. I mean, it sent this woman in a spiral. So is there ways to figure out how the damage control for that, to prevent that from happening to somebody? Now, I know she had gone back and forth with all these different people, came to all these different meetings, but it seems like something in Silicon Valley that they should be able to figure out. And it did really send this woman in circles, and she would not have had to have come here. She wouldn't have gotten behind on everything, and I'm just curious about that. So I'm doing a little digging, but, you know, something's weird. So thank you.
Thank you. Did you want me to have any comments on that?
So would you mind giving us her name? Does she have a case in our department?
Correct, yes, she does.
So
Maybe
not
offline.
off the record, would you mind giving me that information?
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. With that, do you have any closing comments for your reports?
I think we're all set here.
Did you have anything else you want to add? No. All right. So then with that, on this item, we're going to just accept the report, which is fabulous, and we don't have any additional reports. And so we are adjourned until, I apologize, Wednesday, May 22nd at 2 p.m. Thank you.